Okay. Cool. Welcome to everyone that's joining us. We're going to give some more people the chance to join, and then we'll get started with our panel discussion.
All right, Alexis, it looks like we're holding steady with participants here.
All right, well, I turn the virtual mic over to you to kick us off.
All right, well, welcome everybody to When the Women Returned, the Difficult Journey Home for Women in the Military, a panel discussion with 6 women who are veterans. I'm Allie Stefanik. I'm the Assistant Director of Waterfront and Community Programs at Independence Seaport Museum, and I'm really glad that you're here. I wanted to start tonight with a land acknowledgement. As we explore and interrogate the concepts of home, I think it's important to recognize and acknowledge the indigenous people of the land that we now call Penn's Landing in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is home, of course, to the Independence Seaport Museum. The Lenape people are the original inhabitants of Delaware, New Jersey, Eastern Pennsylvania, and Southern New York. And since the beginning of time, they really have been caretakers of these lands, of what we now call the Delaware River. The Lenape were the first tribe to sign a treaty with the United States and the first tribe to have land set aside for them in New Jersey. Over a period of 250 years, many Lenape people were removed and dispersed throughout the country. Some took refuge with other tribes. A large number of Lenape families remained in the homelands and continued the traditions of their ancestors up until today. Today, the Lenape people are revitalizing their communities, and we pay respects to their elders past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us here together today. Thank you. So, as some of you know, the Olympia is one of the historic ships in our collection, and she's really most widely known for her service to the United States Navy during the Spanish-American War. And during the Spanish-American War, the United States lost around 3,000 soldiers. Each of their remains were repatriated or returned home by the military. Decades later, the United States lost over 100,000 soldiers abroad during World War I. Because of the sheer number of casualties and because of advances in weaponry, identification and repatriation were a lot more difficult. So because of that, the remains of one man, the unknown soldier, was selected to memorialize all of the lives that were lost during the war. Once again, Olympia played a critical role. She actually transported the remains of the unknown soldier from Le Havre, France to the United States on his journey to his final resting place at Arlington National Cemetery. That was 100 years ago. Through Olympia's service, and though Olympia's service in World War I is honored in her history, her difficult journey home from France was almost entirely forgotten. So here at ISM, we decided it's been 100 years, and it's time to tell the story of Olympia's difficult journey home and the difficult journey home for the unknown soldier. So during the 16-day journey, the remains of the unknown soldier, while aboard Olympia, were almost lost, actually, as she sailed through 2 violent storms. She rolled at one point 39 degrees, which is only 10 degrees away from being lost entirely. And during the worst of the storm, the Marines that were tasked with guarding the casket actually lashed themselves to the ship because the casket itself was lashed to the ship because it wouldn't fit inside. And they thought if the casket was going down and the ship was going down, they were going down as well. And again, this is a story that, we haven't told really up until now, but one that feels critically important to tell as we're approaching the centennial of the experience. And it's one that's inspired us at Independence Seaport Museum to consider a wide range of difficult journeys home. Over the next year, we're going to be interrogating people's relationships with home, and the complications that come with the idea of home, and also, all of the difficult journeys that all of us have at some point connecting or reconnecting with home. I'm incredibly excited tonight to be doing that with a group of 6 women who are veterans to talk specifically about the unique challenges that face women who are veterans as they transition back to civilian life. So I'm going to turn it back over to Alexis.
Thanks, Allie. Good evening, everyone. My name is Alexis Furling. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications at the museum. Allie and I are going to be the moderators tonight. And just to reiterate what she said, we're really excited and honored that our panelists are here, as well as happy that you are joining us tonight. This year of 2021 is a significant milestone in Olympia's history. As Allie was saying, she brought home the unknown soldier from France from World War I, and it was one of the last acts she performed before being decommissioned. So it's a fitting way to pay her service, kind of what the respect is due, as well as for the unknown soldier to be buried in Arlington as a monument to all those who were lost during the Great War. So tonight, as Allie said, we have 6 panelists joining us to discuss their service and difficult journeys home they faced. We are first going to hear from Dr. Kate Hendricks Thomas. She is an author, an academic researcher, a storyteller, and a United States Marine Corps veteran. She has authored over 100 scientific publications and presentations, and was co-editor of this month's Brown Bag Book Club selection, Invisible Veterans: What Happens When Military Women Become Civilians Again. As part of the programming that Allie was alluding to earlier, every month from February to November, we are picking a different book to virtually read together and then come together the last Tuesday of the month. This month, it will be Tuesday, March 30th at 12, hence the Brown Bag Book Club. So everybody can bring their own lunch and bring their own reflections. So we are going to be reflecting on Dr. Kate's book this month. So I will turn it over to her for opening remarks.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's making time to be in the audience today. It's absolutely incredible of you in this busy day and age. So we appreciate you being part of this conversation. I wanted to open up the dialogue about homecoming with a little story about coming home myself. As Alexis told you, I, in another life, was an officer of Marines. And in 2005, I was with the 2nd Military Police Battalion overseas in Iraq. And I also, in addition to being an officer of Marines, I was also a big sister. I had little sisters, and I had a little brother that also joined the Marine Corps, because in my family, that was the 11th commandment: thou shalt join the Marine Corps. That's what you did. So I'm in Iraq in 2005, and I'm surrounded by wonderful colleagues, many of whom are getting Dear John letters. And a Dear John letter, if you've never heard of it, is a note from your significant other that says, the separation is too much, it's too hard, I don't want to do this anymore. So it had gotten so frequent that we were all laughing about it. So this is the lens through which I received this email from my little brother. And he says, Kate, I met a girl. She's a teacher. She's beautiful and wonderful. And you haven't met her yet, but I'm going to ask her to marry me before I come join you in Iraq. He was scheduled to deploy shortly. And I said, great, ask her to marry you. That's fine. But don't you dare buy her a real diamond. You're going to get a Dear John letter, and you don't want her walking around with an expensive diamond. Now, of course, years later, when we're celebrating our family dinner and they've been married for 14 years, she brings up my cubic zirconia comment. I haven't quite lived that one down. But their relationship, interestingly, was kind of the root of a lot of the work that I do today, because Matt had been in Iraq, my little brother had been in Iraq for about a month when his vehicle drove over a triple stacked mine. And not every Marine made it out of the Humvee alive, and my brother didn't make it out completely unchanged. And he was flown to Germany, to Baghdad, to Germany, and then to Bethesda to begin his recovery. We weren't sure if he was going to be able to keep limbs. We weren't sure if he was going to make it. We at this point, it was a really dark and scary time. My whole family, I had just redeployed from Iraq, so I was able to be at the hospital along with my whole family. And into that environment walked his civilian school teacher. Now she walks in with her hair done and her makeup kind of matches her earrings and her shoes match her shirt. And she's just a little too put together for my liking. And I thought to myself, there is no way that this young woman is going to really be there for him in the way that she needs to be. This is too hard. This is too ugly. She's not a Marine. She's not going to get it. And yet, while others around him didn't see their relationships always make it, this young woman would work every day and then drive up to Bethesda Naval Hospital and sleep in a chair by his bed. She helped him recover. She helped him stop looking backwards at the bombing and at his service and start planning a future with children and a civilian career and a family. And I started to realize at that point how absolutely vital social support is to the military veteran returning home, whether that's returning home from general service or returning home from combat. Men, women, everybody, it matters if you have that high level of social support. My brother did much better because he had that civilian school teacher with the real diamond on her hand supporting him. And I'm glad that he had it. But as I started getting into the field of public health, which is what I do today, I do military mental health research, I kept running into this issue. Women and minority veterans did not report the same levels of unit cohesion while they were serving and social support when they left the military. And so this became my line of research and my line of focus. And my question was really why? Why is it hard to leave the military and go become a normal girl again? Why is that so challenging? And I really only had to think back to my own transition, which was a debacle of missteps and foibles, to realize that the transition is hard because it can often be an invisible transition. You go from being an incredibly visible service member, always in a minority numerically, to being to being an invisible veteran. Nobody knows you were in the service and nobody assumes that you were. So as I started doing this research, one of the things that I found very interesting was the relationship of veteran service organizations, military service organizations, and civic groups. So these are groups where social networking happens. These are groups where veterans enjoy the social capital that comes along with having served. And I found in my research that 75% of women veterans were not a member of any of these civic organizations, which means that one of the primary places that we're supposed to get support when we leave active duty, we're not participating in. And we asked the question, why not? And there were questions of, is their mission relevant to me? And there were a lot of folks who said, it's not a welcoming environment. I'm tired of being the only woman in the room. I don't want to join an organization where that's going to be the case. So right now, we face a challenge. We have women veterans are the fastest growing subpopulation of veterans in the country. We have more women leaving the service every single day. We have 2.2 million women veterans in this country, and they're not visible. We're not necessarily socially supported in the exact same way that we theoretically should be and that we could be. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. We're going to talk about how our experiences shed light on these issues. And we're going to talk about the future of such work and research. What does outreach to women veterans look like? How do we make the transition better for the women that come after us? I joke all the time that we're all old has-beens. We haven't worn a uniform in a couple of years, but we owe it to the women, the young women that stand up, raise their hand, and come after us. We owe it to them to try to make the transition experience better when they leave the active duty component. And I'm so excited to introduce this group of women veterans who've gathered to speak with you today. And they're going to individually introduce themselves to you. And we'll go ahead and get started with that. Kristin, would you start us off, please?
Sure. Thank you so much, everybody, for the initial introductions. I'm Lieutenant Commander Kristin Leone, Navy nurse of 11 years and counting, deployed to Kandahar, Afghanistan in 2015. And in my civilian life, I'm a critical care nurse, so I'm working on the front lines of the pandemic. And like I said, deployed, front lines of the pandemic, military women, we are just accustomed to adapting and overcoming, and it's just what we do. So, 23 years as a nurse, working in, large urban institutions, and really now finding, for me personally, not much of a difference working in Kandahar. I've worked in, like I said, big institutions. So for me, trauma is trauma. And, but what was harder was coming home for me. So that's just a little bit about me. And also, I also serve as the vice president on the board of directors for Haven Women, a homeless women veteran shelter in Philadelphia, right on Baltimore Avenue. And I fell into that via, just basically during the pandemic, trying to keep myself busy, and competed in the Miss Veteran America contest. And through my advocacy work, wound up networking with a lot of veteran service organizations and even some politicians, and wound up getting acknowledged for the work that I was doing by South Jersey Magazine. And I was the first female Grand Marshal of the Philadelphia Veterans Day Parade. And I wound up being interviewed in a couple local TV shows, and now wind up with my own TV show where I highlight veterans, particularly veterans who have small businesses and people who are doing good work in the community. And I've even got some teenagers coming on my show who do volunteer work and who are making a difference in their community.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Kristin. Dr. Loury.
Yes. Well, first of all, good evening to everyone out there on this very drizzly day. When I really was thinking about what you said, Kate, and I'm an ex-Marine as well. And many times you don't find us. All right. And I'm from Columbus, Ohio originally. Anybody knows Columbus, Ohio, and I'm 73. So, somebody else from Columbus, my God, down there. Oh my God. Okay. All right. So it's just me and Sarah. Okay. Well, we know there's not a whole lot in Columbus. All right. This was 1966. And the Vietnam War, of course, was going on. My brother, the entire block had gone, and I was supposed to go to college. That's what my dad said. I went to Ohio State for about 5 minutes, I call it, because I felt like I was getting on a bus from my mother and father's home and going down to Ohio State, and I felt like I was still in high school. But I was also protesting the war and had no idea what I was protesting. So like any, person that has really not a whole lot of sense, I went downtown to mail a letter, and I saw the first poster that had an Air Force. I peeked my head in, and I said, "What are y'all about?" And they said 4 years. That scared an 18-year-old. But I peeked into the Marine Corps office and said, "How many years?" He said, 2. "Come here, let me talk to you." And I went in, came back out. What happened in my household is still talked about in family dinners, about me leaving Ohio State University without having to pay a dime at Ohio State, and I was going into the Marine Corps. Not as an officer, I'm going in as a grunt. Okay, best move I ever made. Best move I ever made. And I'll tell you more about it, but I loved it. I am currently the director of Pan-African Studies at a place called Arcadia University in the Department of Sociology, Anthropology, and Criminal Justice. And some of you may know the name Laura Reddick from Temple University. She was the person that screened the film when it first came out at Temple, because she ran the veterans program. We knew each other 25 years. And one day she said, "I'm going to take this job at Temple to do this veterans thing." And so that'll be great. I was a vet. I known this woman 25 years. Best friend, never told her I was a vet. Never told her to ever. So, and it wasn't out of shame. I'm still not sure why I didn't, because I've never been ashamed. It's been a proudness I've had. So we're going to talk about all those wonderful things. And again, so glad people are here to hear these stories tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Loury. Sarah Plummer Taylor.
Hi, I want to echo everybody's gratitude to those of you who are here in the audience and on the panel. I know that especially kind of this dinner time hour, depending on which time zone you're in, assuming you're in the East Coast, can make it especially tricky, myself included, but I'm really happy to be here. And Doreen, I just wanted to clarify, I'm not from Columbus, Ohio, but I have a special place in my heart for it. I lived there for about a year,
Okay.
actually not long after I got out of the Marine Corps, and it's holds some key memories for me in that transition out of the Marine Corps into the rest of the world, as it were. So I'm Sarah Plummer Taylor, and I would say that I kind of see myself as a social scientist at heart, in that I studied sociology in undergraduate, and studying people and how their relationships are formed, and then how those challenges impact them. Even before I knew that I was going to do what I did in the Marine Corps, I ended up finding this this line of study that was like, what are you going to do with a sociology degree? Ended up being really relevant to me as an officer of Marines later, and then in the work that I've done the last 10 years since leaving the Marine Corps. So I ended up being an intelligence officer in the Marine Corps after initially being a pilot and being disqualified for some medical reasons, which is a whole nother story that may come up tonight. But so deployed to Iraq a couple of times, and my entry both into and out of the Marine Corps was anything but smooth. I was actually an Air Force ROTC at the beginning of my college career, and about 2 weeks after 9/11 switched to Marine Corps ROTC at the just intense dismay of my parents, to the degree that they told me they would disown me. My father told me he would never be proud of me. And actually, before I made the switch, about a week before 9/11, he wrote me a letter which included a comment, thank God you'll never have to fight in a war, but, and warned me of all the terrible things that would happen to me in the Marine Corps. All of which happened, the things that were unspeakable and the things that he mentioned. And that being said, I don't regret my time in service at all. It may sound cliche, but it's absolutely true. It's formed some of my deepest friendships, and has framed me as a person in a way that I'm glad that it has. So since then, I've gone to lots of different schooling and training. I got my master's in social work, and I've applied that both on a mental health and behavioral health level, serving veterans individually, as well as on a community level, doing lots of work with the Mission Continues, in particular to help them frame their service leadership core, to kind of craft that as veterans make a community impact in a way that benefits both them and the community in which they're serving. And especially tying back to Kate's comment about social support and how incredibly vital that is, especially to women veterans, I want to mention what I've done super briefly with sports, because it's been such a foundation for me. I've been so fortunate to be able to represent the US, both as a soccer athlete and in Australian rules football, all over the US and South America and Europe. And it's been some of the most enjoyable moments of my life. I met my husband, who's very much a civilian, playing Gaelic football in Washington, D.C. about 11 years ago. And he and I have continued to move a bunch, both because of my work and his. It's mimicked the military in that way. And every city we've gone to, we have connected with sports teams. And that has been so huge for us to feel like we could come into a city in a place where we knew no one and stay connected. And for me, at a time when I wasn't telling people I was a veteran, it was especially helpful to find that initially as a resource, where I didn't have to be a veteran to be connecting to this group that was going to be really supportive. And so now, 11 years later, my lovely civilian husband and I have a 3-year-old and a 9-month-old, 2 little girls and 2 little dogs, a 3-legged one and a 4-legged one. So thanks again for letting me be a part of this evening.
Thank you, Sarah. And Julia, would you introduce yourself, please?
I don't quite know how to fit in with this group. When I first started being interested in the military was, of course, right after Pearl Harbor in World War II. I wanted to do something, and I was just appalled that women were given practically no choice to do anything. However, the men were leaving rapidly, so there was a market for jobs that were better than the alternative at that point. So I saw in the paper that the Navy was accepting women who had a college degree. I applied, I was accepted, and off I went. And the whole thing was absolutely fabulous for me. I loved it. I loved every bit of the service. I made friends. Unfortunately, I think I'm the only one left, but that's the way it goes. There is a bond to the military that sticks with everybody. It just does. You just felt so much a part of everything. And then you come back to civilian life and you don't feel a part of anything. And at my time, women weren't working. No women worked. I had no friends who worked. Nobody was working. Everybody was married with children, doing housework. And this was such a come down because I had such an interesting job. I lucked into a cryptanalysis job decoding the Enigma machine for the Navy for the German submarine traffic. And it was just fascinating. It was challenging, it was discouraging, but we did it. And I hope that we helped win the war. They said we did. We thought we did. And it was a great disappointment to go back home again and be just a housewife. I did meet my husband also in the service, and we were married in service. And we were married for 62 years, and he died. But it worked out well. We had 3 children and 8 grandchildren and 9 great grandchildren as of now. So, but all the opportunities that I'm hearing you people talk about were not open to women then. It was an odd feeling, but we knew that things were going to get better because everybody that I talked to who had been in the war effort and done something really exciting was not going to be happy just sitting at home. And I think that was probably the start of the great women's revolution to get out in the world and do things. So I did do that. The only thing I did do was go back to college when I was 40 and got my teaching certification. And I taught high school English for several years. And then my husband was in the nuclear power business with Westinghouse. And we traveled, we lived in Japan and we lived in Yugoslavia and we lived in London for 3 or 4 years, each one. It was a buildup. But even then, living in another country, I could not just accept doing nothing. So everywhere I did go, I did teach English, except in London, of course, where I was trying to learn English. But I never got to do all the exciting things that you're all talking about. We were not allowed to go overseas. We were landlocked. And I lived in Washington for the entire war, and I loved Washington. So that's it.
Thank you, Julia. We're glad you're here. And finally, Carrie Evelyn Harris.
Hi, everyone. Again, thank you for having me and having this amazing panel. Miss Julia, I imagine I'll get nods with this, but we couldn't do anything we've done if you hadn't taken those first steps. Right. The truth is, we've all heard about generations of women prior to us and how much harder it was for them. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years prior, and you really were, and all the women that served during World War II really did open the doors for the rest of us. And so I thank you. And I think that your story is amazing, and the spirit, and any women who I've met in my life who served during World War II are just like you, just full of spirit, don't hold me down, don't box me in, and have always been inspirations. And so again, thank you 1,000 times. And I think we probably think we can't live up to what you have done. So again, my name is Carrie Evelyn Harris. I am an Air Force veteran. I didn't join the military. While I come from a long line of military, all different branches. I didn't join the military to carry on a tradition. My parents wanted me to go to college. I tried it and it wasn't for me at the time. And so I had a conversation with my mom. I first went to the Marines office, right? And my mom was like, oh, just really think about it. Gave me all the scary stories that Sarah's parents probably gave her. And so I thought a little longer and tried a little bit more school. And I was like, I can calm my mom's spirits if I join the Air Force. So I did. And she says, well, you came with a really exact plan and it seems this is what you're going to do, so go for it. I joined under delayed enlistment. So for those of you listening, delayed enlistment is where you sign up and you might not leave because your school is not going to be open for several months in the future, sometimes up to a year. But the time that you're on delayed enlistment works also towards your retirement, which doesn't really matter early on, but it does. In the time between where I signed up and where I left for basic, 9/11 happened. At that point, it did feel I could have pulled out because when you're in delayed enlistment, you do have the option of changing your mind. But at that point, there was a sense of patriotism. And I think it was a time when a lot of us felt that way. I remember going off to basic and they literally cheered us like, we have a bunch of people, and they cheered us. And, people really felt that we were going to fight the good fight, so to speak. But my time in the service really taught me something different. I can't speak for everyone, but I was enlisted air crew. I was flying in and out of theater all the time. We have the distinct honor. I was stationed at Dover Air Force Base. One of our distinct honors is to return all fallen soldiers, whether killed in combat or accidents or whatever. You touch American soil the first time in the United States. And we really, really take that seriously. And I don't know if any of you have had the honor of participating in Returning Remains Home, but all branches do it. The Air Force just has the opportunity to actually fly them to Dover. But you realize just how fragile life is. When we were in a war that people just watched on TV like it was a reality TV show, but it wasn't real to them, but it was real to us. Hearing the conflicts happening within government, realizing and seeing the destruction that happens in war zones, serving alongside people in those countries that really did become your friends. And then they're left there, even though they were told that we would find safe haven for them if they helped us. It tears at your heart. At the same time, I got to stay in places like Kuwait and learn that they were like the United States of America for people from other parts of the world, right? People would move there so their children would be born there because you don't see a homeless person in the streets of Kuwait because they get a portion of the oil revenues. And you think of all the things that we can take. And at that time, America was still looked at as the beacon of hope. This is what we can be. And towards the end of my term, even those of us serving started to question. And then getting home, people started to not realize what we could have been. And we started to fall apart and fight amongst ourselves in ways that we haven't seen since the Civil War. And all I remember was, I love my country. Like, as messed up as we are, I love my country and I want to fix it. And I planned to serve a full 20, but I was medically retired in 2008. And since then, I served my country as a community organizer and advocate, working on all types of issues that deal with social and economic justice, trying to bring communities together, understanding and letting people realize that all of our struggles are connected. The intersection of this idea of race, which is a man-made ism, and economics. And that's really the driver that keeps us separated, but should really be pulling us together. In 2018, I ran for United States Senate. It was my first time running and we had a really good showing, but it pulled a lot of people together and has allowed me to have a platform to make it so that I can leverage the new broader network that I have for the people and make impactful change from local all the way up to national levels. And it's something I'm proud of. And I know that when we get out of the service, oftentimes we're looking for another way to serve. And I've been blessed to find what my next calling was. And then also understand that There is brokenness in the service. I am broken because of the service physically. There are things that happen to me in the service that I still struggle with. And so I have PTS. I'm trying to leave off that D because it makes us uncomfortable. It makes it seem like there's something wrong with us, and there's not. But there are some beautiful things that also came. A sisterhood, a brotherhood, understanding that at any given time, if you work hard enough and you plan well enough, you can make anything happen. The divides that we often have in our country get thrown out the window because a bunch of people coming from different parts of the world, the different parts of the nation, end up at one training center, and we figure out how to just get over it. And whatever our families might have taught us or our communities taught us don't matter, because we have a new family that we will give our lives for. And we start to understand what America really could be. You see the United States Air Force, the United States Marines, all the branches are the jumping off point for all major social change, right? Women being able to serve in any industry. I served initially under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I do identify as LGBTQ community, and yet, we integrated and we made it so that you could serve freely and without fear of losing your career. And then we start to see it outside. The integration of race started in the military. And so I think we have a special ability to create change. And I think we just need to realize that if we come together, if we use our voice, because the nation allows us to have a louder voice because we are veterans, we can bring our country back to a place where we all believe we were serving for the best interest of all of us, and make everybody else believe that we can do that as well.
Yeah.
Very good.
Thank you, everybody, for introducing yourselves. And thank you, Kate, for facilitating that. I actually, Carrie, that kind of leads us almost perfectly into our first question, which is, this year we're really exploring people's journeys home and their relationships, sometimes challenging relationships with home. And this is for any of you, but when you think about all of the intersections of your identity, what does home mean to you? What is home?
I'll start a little bit. What was interesting for me, and I thought about what Kate said and the other women have talked about, I ended up marrying a man that was an abuser, who thought, that it was okay, to fight with me. And I didn't grow up under that kind of nonsense, and still try to figure out, that whole female thing, I can change him, I can make him better, all the BS. I say everyone would do it like this. I don't care what kind of relationship you're in, straight, gay, doesn't matter. We fall for the same BS, okay? And with that, I could not get the military to help me because he was a G2 intelligence officer. So I would call and say, this man and I are fighting and he's hitting me. And they told me I need to go somewhere and cool down for a while. So I had my daughter, God bless her. And I think I left 3 times. I left him 3 times. The final time I did leave him was because he picked up our daughter and threw her into a crib. And I went, oh, this is going to be a cycle. So why do you want to stay here? And as everyone who's been in a relationship, and especially I think if you're military, I picked up a gun, stood by his head and said, well, if I shoot him, what am I going to say to the police when they come? And then I looked at my daughter and said, but you will not raise this child. And he turned over and looked at me and said, bitch, you don't have the nerve. I knew it was time to go. I said, okay, let me get the hell out of here. And what I did from that point on for many, many years, I used to do seminars. And the seminars were called, Don't Let the Suit Fool You. I had my suit on, my hair fixed, and I was talking to them about what it means to be thrown out of a car in the middle of New York, dragged out of Sears, and the women would stand there and go, but you're so together. I said, don't let the suit fool you. So knowing that lack of support that when I came out of the military, and the same lack of support with this abuser, I was like, let me put my life in working with women so they can figure out the ways to do this, an escape plan, all of that stuff. Well, I was very much a part of it, and a part of even the Women's Memorial that's in DC. I was part of that whole piece. And again, met women again and had workshops, because that for what, and you know, you all already know, we've all gone through that piece with women not being believed, and watching women not being believed who were battered and bruised. And I mean, it was just terrible. And I thank God I had parents that once I told them, they could not believe that I had stayed that long. And I didn't stay long, but I stayed too long. But I think that was the coming home for me, was that in the military, I wasn't taken care of that way, and came home to the same thing, that the authorities were not going to take care of me, because when I would call them, and he would always run and put his uniform on whenever the cops came. Okay. And,
I'll be darned.
oh yeah, because he knew, because we lived in military places, not on base. He always made sure we never stayed on base. And so they would come and they say, oh, Sarge, what's going on? And I'm sitting there with a 2-year-old baby crying, you know. So I knew then that these pieces were not clicking. And I made it my life's work to come out and make sure they started clicking.
I would say for me, the notion of coming home was the first time I went to an event held by a veteran service organization, and I met a couple of other women veterans. I hadn't run into another military woman in however long. And in having a conversation, I shared a couple of things, and one of the women turned to me and said, yeah, you know, me too. She understood my transition experience. She understood
Yeah.
what was going on in my life, because she was living it too. And so I have really enjoyed the coming home experience that is the women veterans community, because we'll do anything for each other.
Mhm.
And whether that's professional or personal. And I've found that to be very important.
I never had any bad experiences, such as the doctor was just describing, thank goodness, but I think I would have left also. I did have a friend who came in with a black eye, and her comment was, every woman needs a beating once in a while.
Mm.
And she accepted this. And I thought it was just incredibly bad. I think your work has probably done a great deal to help people. I hope it has.
Yeah.
I hope the women are listening,
Mhm.
and not thinking they're going to change them, because we all know you do not change anybody. It just does not work that way. But I was just ignored as far as my service ability was concerned. In any groups we got in, if the subject got around to the military and it was brought out that I had been in the military, it was just dismissed and overlooked, and that was that. So I didn't even mention it, because somehow people looked at me as if I had done something shameful. It was a different world in those days. It just was different, but I loved it, and as did all of my friends. So
Julia, I think that's actually a really interesting point, right? That it's a different world now, because I think that, you know, a lot of the research shows us that that's not necessarily true, right? And that women who are veterans still now are dismissed often, and their service record is dismissed. And I'm going to stop talking, but I wanted to use that as an opportunity to segue into our next question, which I'm going to let Alexis ask.
So we wanted to ask kind of what Allie was saying, talking about how there are similarities. What do you think there are some common challenges on the journey home for women who are veterans? spanning, I mean, between all of you, the service spans from the 1940s up into like the 2010s to recent. So there is the time that's a difference, and maybe the conflict difference, but the coming home, do you think there's similarities that you all faced?
I'd like to jump in and share something that I think maybe bridges the gap between the two questions, especially with what Julia just shared, in that I hesitated initially for years to volunteer the information that I had been in the military, unless I absolutely, would have to be lying to not say it. And then to eventually becoming really involved in the veteran space. And I did a lot of work when I was living in Denver with VFW Post 1. And every year they had a founders ball that was around the same time as like the Marine Corps birthday ball. And I didn't go to Marine Corps birthday ball as a civilian. So this was kind of my opportunity to have that kind of, gala environment. And I brought my husband with me, who I've mentioned is a civilian, because that's kind of like jokingly a bad word in our household. I know Kate can relate to that. We joke about using civilian as a pejorative all the time, but he takes it pretty well. Anyway, we go to this founders ball. And so even in a community where I, in some ways, was a public figure through advocacy work I was doing, volunteer work, professional work, kind of spanning the variety of different ways to be involved there, I would still meet people at the ball who would just stare either right past me or look at my husband and say, "So what did you do in the military?" And he'd say, I didn't serve in the military. My wife did." And they'd go, no, what did you do? And would just, like, they couldn't even hear him, what he was saying, that he would even like turn them toward me and be like, "She was in the Marine Corps." And people just couldn't, it was like it didn't compute. And so I think, Julia, just what you were sharing, and not to say that it's the same experience, but that piece of it, of what you just shared, resonated for me, because even in this day and age, I've had that, not just at the VFW1 Founders Ball, but numerous situations where I'm out with my husband at even a VSO event, a veteran service organization, and people just automatically go to him and start asking him what he did. And even when he insists that it wasn't him who served, people still kind of have a hard time with that. And so I think just one of the pieces that I think we've all been nodding our heads to and relating is just even that identity, and at what point in your coming home journey, whether that's initially or a decade later or 20 years later, owning that as a piece of your identity, and what that looks like for you, with the other identities that you have, the hats that you wear, and how all of those intersect. And at what I still struggle with that, of like whether to tell my new neighbors in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, that I was in the Marine Corps. It's something I've hidden in some ways from them as we've moved here from Denver, where that was a very big part of my identity. And now it's something in a suburban area with lots of, I'll throw a cliche out there, housewives and things, that identities that I haven't always openly identified with, that I've kind of buried the military identity a little bit more here in this new environment. And that sort of surprised me that I've caught myself doing that. So still a challenge for me personally.
I was also going to mention the fact that my husband joined several military organizations, but they wouldn't let me in. They didn't want women in any of them. I think I have no idea whether women are allowed in them now or not.
There's your research, Alan.
Yeah, I think the one thing that still surprises me is that it's 2021 and we're still facing discrimination. Last year I was in Wawa wearing my Kandahar, Afghanistan t-shirt, and a gentleman approached me and said, "Oh, does your husband serve in the military?" And I said, "No, I served. I was there in 2015. He was kind of looked totally shocked and was like, "Oh, thank you for your service," and then walked away. And recently, I think it was about a month ago, I had my Kandahar sweatshirt on, and a gentleman kept looking at me, and I was like, "Oh, here we go with the usual, oh, did your, insert male figure serve?" conversation. And he was like, Miss, did you serve in the military? I said, yes, I do actually. I'm still in the military. He's like, well, thank you for your service. And we had a conversation about his son being a Marine. And I think I almost cried because it was the first time anybody approached me in any type of like military, acknowledgement, and actually, said something to me about it, me being serving and not, some male figure in my life, and everybody thinks, like we're still facing this, and it's definitely more than a little frustrating. And, we come home from war, and, it doesn't matter if you were in Iraq, Afghanistan, Cuba, like we still have issues coming home because people don't realize when we're deployed, that becomes our new normal. And then we come home, and yes, we're happy to be home, but we have to re-assimilate into civilian life. And like, I'm like not a girly girl. Like I grew up a tomboy. So look, when I was deployed, as much as it was, as hard as it was, I like the fact that I knew, look, the hair went up every day and I was in the uniform every day, and you're not doing the food shopping and the feeding of the pets and the, the washing of the laundry and things. And so coming home and having to actually, what am I going to wear today? How am I going to do my hair? And like being in the supermarket was so stressful because we get used to that life. And then we come home, and I remember being in the supermarket with my mom, and she's like, what do you need? And I think I actually started crying because I don't know, because it totally stressed me out. I got lost in my own neighborhood because I was driving at night and hadn't driven for 8 months, and I certainly hadn't driven at night, and I got completely disoriented, and I was like, where am I? And I pulled over and cried. Like, I'm lost in my own neighborhood. So, we still have to, we as women, I think it's super important for us to not be ashamed of our military service. We need to be loud and proud and talk about it. It's being the first female Grand Marshal of the Philadelphia Veterans Day Parade for me was a huge deal. It's like, but it shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't just be, oh, well, male, we associate veterans with men. Like we've been serving since the Revolutionary War. I mean, Deborah Sampson pulled a bullet out of herself and got back in the fight. So, I've always been loud and proud about my service, and we need to talk about our stories and, whatever level that we're comfortable with, but definitely acknowledging that we served, I think, is one piece of the puzzle to getting, fighting against that discrimination that we're still facing even today.
So I want to be respectful of all of your times. And I wanted to give everybody just a few minutes warning here that we're nearing the end of our hour. So with that being said, we have one more question, and then if we have time, we're going to open it up for audience questions as well. And, of course, if you do have questions and you're interested, we are on Tuesday, the 30th at noon. We're going to do our Brown Bag Book Club discussion, which is going to be a deep dive into invisible veterans, and also a deep dive into When Women Come Marching Home, which is the documentary by Marsha Rock. And so if folks in the audience are interested, or if any of our panelists are interested in joining us for that, we can continue this conversation, of course. But for our last question from Independent Seaport Museum, we just wanted to know, are there anything that any of you wish that people knew about your experience returning home? Is there like a thing that just grates you, or a thing that you think that, if you could pick just one thing that you could demystify for people about your return home, what would that be?
I'm sorry, do you want to go first, Kate? Okay. I would just say that our experience is not much unlike our male counterparts. We have real healing that has to happen. In the same way that I would not encourage you to ask any male member, you shouldn't ask us direct questions about our experiences unless we seem open to it. Don't act so surprised that we're there. I mean, Miss Julia's here. We've been here since the 40s. Okay. And in fact, we're serving during the Civil War and Revolutionary War. We've been here. And that's just American history. Women have been pivotal pieces of every major conflict. And oftentimes we have a heavier load. I don't know about your experiences personally, but you'd be surprised how often our male counterparts turn to us for support in some of the hardest times. And we have to be those figures that keep them strong. And then we have to internalize it. And we often don't have other people to unload on, because I could probably count on my fingers the number of missions where I was with other women, right? So we're real. It's not, I'm not saying we're fragile, but we do have pain, right? And so be honor that in us in the same way that you would honor that in men.
As Carrie said, I think it's be proud of us. Be proud of us. I think that, and for me being from the African American community, and being a straight female, it got real wild about why they thought I went into the military, because I was a tomboy. No, that was some real stuff back then. All right, especially going into the Marine Corps. And my father walking me around our yard, God bless his heart, and letting me know that just in case I was gay, he was okay with that. Okay, but okay. And you're talking 1966. So he was, you know, he said the neighbors are talking. And I'm like, because I played football, but I was a track star, all that. And I was like, whoa. And I, over the years, have thought, well, is that why I never said Marine Corps, even though I was in the Air Force Reserves for 12 years and I had a commission in the Ohio National Guard. So I've always stayed in the military, but it was always somehow in my community, I can only speak for my community, they always wanted to lump that up with gender and sexuality. And it used to blow my mind that, you know, that was, you know, somehow that was connected. But it was always, and my parents were so proud of me, that it was about be proud of us. Because we were there, we were doing the job, many times better than our male counterparts. And
Right.
We have to understand that what we went through was so different. And I just say be proud of us.
The work I did was so secret that I couldn't tell anyone about it. And I didn't know that the Enigma machine had been declassified until something like 40 years after it was declassified. And then I told my husband, and he couldn't believe that a woman could have kept a secret all those years. But I did. But nobody ever asked me what I did, so I didn't have to lie. I had never talked about it, so I never could. But at least we proved that women could keep a secret. And there were a lot of us who knew what was going on, who did not tell anybody. So I think that was a good point in our favor.
Does anybody else want to answer that?
I think, and you know, it just kind of boils down to what your comfort level is. I mean, like I said, I'm loud and proud about my military service, always have been. I'm the first woman in my family to serve, and I'm extremely proud of that. And I went to Afghanistan and came back from it. So, you know, as long as we as women band together and support each other and encourage each other, and we don't hide our voices, then we will continue to bring to light the fact that we've always been here and we're going to continue to be here. And like, you know, Ms. Doreen said, you know, be proud of us because we're doing a lot of good work, especially if I'm still serving and I'm, you know, serving my community in addition to serving my country. And, you know, one of the things that I actually struggle with is when someone says to me, thank you for your service. I never know what to say. I always say, oh, thank you. But I think a friend of mine who's also, she's an Army vet, said, I always tell people, if you want to thank me, pay it forward. So I think, you know, when civilians approach us and say, thank you for your service. I think if we start spreading the message of, you really want to thank me for my service, then pay it forward and help another veteran. Because the more we talk about women veterans, the less invisible we will become once we come out of the service.
Well, that just about does it for us. Thank you again to all of our panelists for the great discussion. I think, you definitely given everybody a lot to think about, and thank you for being so open with your answers. I think it really opened our eyes and the people watching from home as well. Thank you to all who tuned in for our program this evening. We are, as Ali mentioned earlier, we are doing year-long programming. So I encourage you to visit our website, phillyseaport.org/unknown events. And we keep up to date list of everything coming up, including April 1st. We'll be talking to the president of the Tomb Guard of the Unknown Soldier to get the history of the unknown soldier, why I went to Arlington, and how other unknowns were honored throughout the years following World War I. And then we are also partnering with Opera Philadelphia in May to discuss their film they just released called Soldier Songs. So I encourage you to check that out. Thank everybody so much for joining us tonight, and stay safe. And we hope to see you at the Seaport soon. Bye.
Bye-bye, ladies.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.